Welcome to another video.
Today we'll be discussing the Ampex Micro 87R. This starts off with a totally black screen until it's activated, and then boom, what you need shows up on the otherwise black screen. Does that remind you of anything else we have in our pockets these days?
Cell phones.
Yes. I saw this in a stack of audio equipment. It was laying face down. I just saw these buttons and the word Ampex. I thought maybe it was a reel-to-reel, but when I lifted it up, saw all this other stuff with the tuner. It's like, wow, it's a receiver. It was designed in 1969, released in 1970. It was called a receiver.
It was $269.
Yeah, I paid $15. It was called a receiver, a music center, or a cassette recorder and player. And it originally came with speakers, microphones, and some demo tapes, which I didn't get. The Micro 52 is a tape deck only version, which has no amplifier or receiver. It also came as the MX1000. It was shoved into a cabinet with a turntable. And there's another view of the MX1000. And also has a neat little storage area for cassettes above it. The only difference
is it was only for a long time ago.
The only difference I could see between the two, the MX1000 has a different badge on top of it, and on the back, since the phono is internally wired, there's no phono input. So the problems with this thing I got at the garage sale, we had a dead channel, and then the tape, when I pressed play, didn't seem to be moving, and finally just dirt everywhere. So the first thing I did was notice the dead channel. When I turned the right volume, it didn't do anything. There was noise coming out of the speakers, but no inputs. I figured it was like in the input stage, so I took it apart. It's somewhere on this board. I get it to come on. Notice when I tapped this thing, I would occasionally get audio, this little red strap thing. So I took it off and found what looked like some loose circuits. I added a drop of solder, and that problem was fixed.
Dead channel was fixed?
Now, this little odyssey of disassembly I went on was not necessary to fix this. So the tape wasn't moving, so I took off the case, started cleaning it, took off the side pieces. There's tons of screws to get this thing apart. Took off all the knobs.
That's an expert at all technology.
Oh, I thank you. I'm not really an expert. Anyway, took off all the knobs, and there was a screw in the back and on the sides. There's a screw. It had a lot of these what I call self-stripping screws. They seem to almost immediately strip. And then took off the front piece here, and just to get to the motor. I read some articles online about the motor overheating, and when I held on to the motor, it seemed like it was running all the time. There's a capacitor, which confirms this thing was built in 1970, or 71, I guess. And then, when I took off this metal piece on the top so I could kind of see in the top. Incidentally, this thing is really well constructed. So the motor, when you just turn the thing on and hold the motor, you can feel a little bit of current going through it. So I thought, well, maybe the motor's not working. It's got several belts in there, which are all intact, and despite being, 48 years old, they are doing just fine. I cleaned them off a little bit. So I got the motor out, and I wasn't getting any voltage to it, and I thought, that's weird. Then I discovered there's actually a little switch down there.
Whoa.
So the motor does feel like it's running. You can feel a slight some vibration. But when you press play or any of the buttons, nothing was happening.
That's weird.
Yeah. So what I discovered and what led me down this wild goose chase was there's a switch down here, and you hit the switch and the motor came on, and so it has a tape-in switch. Boy, do I feel silly after taking it apart. But
Dad!
Well, as it turns out, there was a good reason to take it apart because there was another problem I discovered. But what happens is you put the tape in, it clicks that switch down, and voila, the motor turns. So
you don't need.
Yeah, well, anyway, after I figured that out, I put it all back together and just to see what the tape would do, and it worked.
Dad, all you needed to do is put a tape in it, and it worked.
I know. Well,
How silly.
Just goes to show you just got to check the obvious stuff. After reading on the forums, I was reading about a guy who had a motor.
So that wasn't broken.
This wasn't broken. However, there was another problem with it. We'll find here in a second. But it's a really solidly built mechanism. Everything is functioning. It just feels solid. It's probably, I don't know how good it sounds, but it feels pretty solid. And you can see it's got some brass gears in there, and or I guess yeah, you see the belts moving. Everything is caked with dirt. So I was going to try to get to the belts, so I started to unhook this board, but there's so many wires behind this rear panel, it was impossible. It doesn't really want to come out of there very easily. The counter wasn't moving, and so the little belt on the counter wasn't moving, and it goes over to a gear which was hopelessly frozen. I mean, I could not move it. So at that point I thought, okay, well, there's a good reason to take off the back board. So if you look at that gear in the kind of the middle bottom of the screen there, oops, I can reach in my finger and it is locked up solid. I was trying to get the board out to where I could get to the E-clip and get that off and kind of lube it. I assumed the grease had just dried up. What I ended up doing was just holding a soldering iron on the shaft for a couple minutes. It melted the grease. I got some oil in there and got it turning again. But that was why I was trying to get that rear board off. But as you can see, the rear, so that gear has a belt which goes off the reel, which goes over to the counter. And yeah, it goes from the reel all the way back to the reel turns that belt, which turns the counter. And I've got wires that are twist tied in every direction. So this board, I never did get it out completely because really didn't want to rip a wire loose. I have no schematics or any way to know where the wires go. And taking out the board, you can see the little record tab switch there in the middle. I sprayed some air in there. I put some deoxit on the record switch, and I freed up that last pulley, which, you know, I was able to do that while getting this board out. But I can't imagine having to change the belts on this thing. Here's all the 7 twist ties I had to remove to get the board out that far. That was insane. You know, it's just I had to take out a VU meter to lose some tension on that wire. And after all that, the counter sort of turned, but those belts weren't that great. But considering it's 48 years old and those are non-essential, I just sort of left that for now. I may go back and replace those belts at some point in the future if I don't sell this thing. So that fixed the tape movement problem, which really wasn't a problem. Third problem was just dirt. There was dirt everywhere. Look at that. This thing probably just sat in somebody's garage. I mean, yeah, but it was just...
How many brake ties were there?
There were 7.
Whoa.
But after cleaning it up, it looks much better. You know, I just was once I had the cover off, I was able to blow it out, wipe it off. It looks so much better. You can actually see my face in the reflection there. A couple of scuffs on it and some places I need to go back and clean. The top part, the metal part, I used some magic eraser and some water, which did a pretty good job at taking off the grime. And it looks pretty nice now. One other thing I'm in the process of doing is speaker adapters. This uses 1/4-inch phono plugs for the speakers, which I don't really have, and I want to be able to hook up other speakers. So I got these little connectors in a box, and I'm going to kind of make myself a little adapter. I'm just waiting on the phono plugs to come in. So until those come in the mail, I'm just going to be using the line out and some amplified speakers. Now let's talk about some unique things about this device. One, it's got a belt cleaner. I've never seen that on any other tape deck. If you look in there, you'll see these things which looks like 2 little paintbrushes. But as the motor turns, the belt is continuously going through that thing. I don't know if it adds any wow and flutter, but this is probably the original belt from 48 years ago, and it still works. Another thing that was unique about this unit that I haven't seen before is the boombox style loading. Well, obviously I've seen it before, but most tape decks load right side up. This one loads upside down, and other models of the era were either piano key style or the other way, but I guess when you think about it, Ampex being a reel-to-reel company, that's the way reel-to-reels work. The heads are above it. So anyway, third thing I thought was interesting is the tuning knob. When you tune an FM station, you're moving this bar left to right, or right to left. Like on other receivers, it moves back and forth horizontally, which makes sense since you're turning the knob. This one you turn up and down, which is kind of unique. The whole thing is kind of a unique design thing. Finally, the VU meters and level controls. I think this thing is trying to straddle the market between automatic and manual. So you got these nice VU meters which light up and work, but there's a very prominent auto manual record switch. And if you recall, the picture I showed earlier of the Micro 52 had dedicated level controls. This thing, you share the level controls with the volume controls, which is odd. So here I'm going to make a recording. Notice how I flip to auto, it gets louder. If I flip to manual, I can adjust the level with the volume control, but it also turns up the volume. Now that may go away when I get the speaker connectors in. I'll see if that's still true, but I'm using the line output. So anyway, let's make a recording. So now I'm going to just kind of play with the levels while it's recording. Incidentally, sharing the level meters with the volume control works great for a recording level, but not for volume, because with volume, I'd rather have a balance control and a volume control, because once you get the balance right, you should just be increasing and decreasing the volume. But anyway, Here, let's play back the recording, and it definitely did work, and the recording actually sounds pretty decent. You know, I'm pretty impressed with this tape deck. It's a very solid feeling mechanism, and for something that looks like it's been abused and is, you know, 48 years old, I mean, this is pretty impressive. Sound quality wise, I don't know enough about electronics to know how to replace capacitors or figure out if there's noise in it, but just from a general point of view, you know, the quality of the construction was pretty impressive. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Probably sell it in a garage sale, but it was a fun little experiment. And until then, I guess we'll see you next time.
See you next time for another video.